She walked into that wedding as the woman they buried and walked out on the arm of the man who made them all bleed. This is the story of Vivian Ashcroft, betrayed by her fiancé, humiliated by her sister, left with nothing but rage and a half-empty glass of bourbon. But fate doesn't always arrive with a warning. Sometimes it arrives in a black suit, with dark eyes that see exactly what everyone else refused to look at. Drop a like. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow me to the very end. You won't see this ending coming. Done. The mirror in Vivian's office bathroom had never lied to her before. She stood in front of it at 7:43 in the morning. Mascara she hadn't bothered to remove the night before dried into dark crescents beneath her eyes. Her silk blouse wrinkled from sleeping on the couch in her office because she hadn't been able to face going home. The fluorescent light above the sink hummed with that particular frequency that made everything look worse than it already was. Or maybe, she thought, pressing her fingertips against the cold edge of the porcelain sink, it just showed things exactly as they were. She turned on the cold water and splashed it against her face. Once, twice, stood there dripping and looked at herself again. 34 years old. Senior Vice President of Public Relations at Hargrove & Associates, one of the most respected PR firms in Manhattan. She had handled crisis communications for Fortune 500 companies, navigated media firestorms for politicians who'd made catastrophic decisions, rebuilt reputations from ashes. She knew how to take something broken and make it look whole again. She'd just never expected to need that skill for herself. Her phone buzzed against the counter. She looked at the screen. Graham. She turned it face down without answering and reached for a paper towel. The call was the 14th one he'd made since yesterday afternoon. She hadn't answered a single one. She wasn't going to. There wasn't anything left to say. It had happened the way most disasters happened. Not all at once, but in fragments, each one manageable alone, each one pointing toward the larger collapse that you didn't see coming until you were already standing in the rubble. 3 weeks ago, Graham Whitaker had sat across from her at their kitchen table in the apartment they shared in Tribeca. His apartment, she corrected herself now. She'd never actually put her name on the lease. And he'd said the words in a tone so measured, so carefully calibrated, that she'd thought at first he was reciting talking points for a client meeting. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he'd said, about where we are, about where I need to be. Graham was 38, a rising executive at Calder Merit Capital, a man who wore his ambition the way other men wore cologne, applied every morning, slightly overwhelming, impossible to ignore. He was handsome in that sharp-edged way that photographed well and aged badly. He'd proposed to her 18 months ago at a restaurant in the West Village, a place he'd specifically selected because it had a Michelin star and 3 of his colleagues had seen them there. She had thought at the time that it was romantic. She understood now that it had been a performance. Everything with Graham was a performance. "What are you saying?" she'd asked, even though some cold, truthful part of her already knew. He'd straightened the collar of his shirt, a nervous habit she'd cataloged over 4 years together, and never called out, because she'd been careful, always so careful not to crowd him, not to push, not to make him feel trapped. "I think," he said, "that we want different things. I think the direction my career is heading requires a certain kind of partnership, and I don't think what we have is that." "Partnership," she repeated. "Image is everything in my world, Vivian. You know that. I need someone who—" He stopped. Started again. "I need someone who fits into the life I'm building." She'd sat very still. The apartment had been quiet except for the sound of a taxi honking 12 floors below on the street, which felt like a very specific kind of cruelty. "Are you telling me I don't fit?" He hadn't answered directly. He'd said something about growth, about evolution, about needing to make difficult decisions. She'd listened to all of it. She'd absorbed it. She'd said with a dignity she still couldn't entirely account for that she understood, and she'd gotten up from the table, gone to the bedroom, packed a bag, and left. She hadn't cried until she was in the elevator. She hadn't stopped for 3 days after that. She could have survived Graham. She knew that even in the middle of it. He'd been a mistake she'd worn for 4 years. A mistake she'd mistaken for love because she'd been lonely and he'd been attentive, at least at the beginning. She could have packed up that particular wound and carried it, and eventually, with enough time and enough work and enough late nights at the office throwing herself into other people's catastrophes, she could have healed it. What she couldn't survive What had actually broken something in her came 5 days later. Her mother had called on a Sunday morning. Vivian had been in her childhood bedroom in the Ashcroft family home in Greenwich, having driven out from the city because she needed a week away from Manhattan, away from every street corner that had a memory attached to it. She'd been sitting at the small desk where she used to do homework in high school, drinking coffee and staring at her laptop without actually reading anything on the screen, when her phone rang. Her mother, Patricia Ashcroft, had a voice like a statement of fact, warm enough to satisfy social requirements, but there was always something underneath it, some fundamental assessment being made, some conclusion already drawn. Vivian had grown up understanding that she was never quite the conclusion her mother had hoped for. "I'm going to tell you something," Patricia had said, "and I need you to hear it calmly." Vivian had set down her coffee cup. "Tell me, Graham called your father yesterday." A pause. Studied. "He and Celeste have been seeing each other for about 7 months." Another pause, shorter. "They're engaged." The room had gone very quiet. 7 months meant that Graham had begun seeing her younger sister approximately 5 months before he'd ended his engagement to Vivian. 7 months meant that while he had been reaching across the kitchen table to take her hand and tell her he was proud of her promotion, while he'd been sitting next to her at her own company's holiday gala, while he'd been sleeping beside her, Celeste had been somewhere in the same city, wearing something expensive, being told she fit. Celeste Ashcroft was 29. She was 5'8", 130 pounds, blonde in the way that required significant financial investment to maintain. She was a personal stylist with a client list full of names that appeared in page 6, and she'd spent the better part of her life being the version of herself that everyone in the family pointed to when they wanted an example of something. She and Vivian had never been close, exactly, but they'd been civil. They'd had Christmas dinners and birthday dinners and the occasional Sunday brunch, and Vivian had believed that to mean something. She understood now what it actually meant. "The wedding is in 3 weeks," Patricia continued, "at the Whitmore estate on Long Island. Graham has already spoken to the press. Apparently it's going to be quite an event." Vivian had said, "I have to go," and ended the call. She'd sat in that childhood bedroom for a long time after that, listening to the sounds of the house, her father's footsteps on the hardwood in the hallway, the old radiator ticking against the wall, a bird doing something pointless and cheerful outside the window. She'd sat and she'd thought about 7 months, about the way Graham used to tell her she had a beautiful laugh, right up until the point where he stopped mentioning it, about the way Celeste had hugged her at their parents' anniversary dinner in October, when those 7 months were already 2 months old. She'd thought about all of it for a long time. Then she'd driven back to Manhattan. She found a sublet in Midtown through a colleague, a junior account manager named Daphne, who had a friend with a corporate apartment available for 6 weeks. It wasn't a great apartment. It was a 1-bedroom in a building from the 1970s with walls thin enough to hear the neighbors and a kitchen that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. But it had a lock, and it was hers, and she slept better there than she had in the Tribeca apartment in years, which told her something she should have understood a long time ago. She went to work every day. She handled her accounts. She sat in meetings, and she made strategic recommendations, and she gave measured, confident statements to journalists on behalf of her clients, because she was good at this. She was very good at this, and she wasn't going to let any of this take that from her. What she didn't do was talk about it. She didn't tell her colleagues. She didn't call her friends, most of whom were actually mutual friends with Graham. And she didn't call her mother back. And she didn't respond to Celeste's text message that arrived 3 days after her mother's phone call. The text said, "I know you're hurting. I hope someday you can understand. I love you." Vivian had read it 3 times, saved a screenshot for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate, and then set the phone face down on her desk and gone back to work. She held it together with the particular competence of someone who had learned early that falling apart was not something the world rewarded. She held it together for 2 weeks, and then she didn't. It was a Thursday night when it finally cracked. She had been in the office until 9, finishing a crisis communications brief for a tech client whose CEO had made an impulsive comment on a podcast that was currently being dissected by every major outlet. She'd been good at it. She'd been precise, efficient. She'd known exactly what needed to be said and what needed to be buried and how to move the narrative forward. She'd sent the brief, closed her laptop, and sat in the silence of the empty office for a moment. Then she'd opened her laptop again and looked up the Whitmore estate on Long Island. It was the kind of estate that existed to make you feel the weight of other people's money. 300 acres on the North Shore, a main house built in 1908 that had been photographed for architectural journals, a ballroom with crystal chandeliers that a socialite blogger had described, reverently, as transcendent. The wedding had been mentioned in a social column. 3 paragraphs, effusive, full of words like stunning and power couple and the event of the season. There was a photo of Celeste in a Vera Wang sample, standing in front of a window, laughing at something off camera. She looked beautiful. She looked like she fit. Vivian had closed the laptop and sat there with the particular feeling of someone watching their life being lived by someone else, wearing her face and her history and the best years of her effort. And she'd thought, I am not going to survive this sitting still in an empty office. She'd gotten her coat and her bag, and she'd taken the elevator down to the lobby, and she'd walked out into the cold November air, and she'd kept walking until she found herself standing in front of the Carver Hotel on 53rd Street, which had a bar on the ground floor that she'd been to exactly twice before for client events, and she'd pushed through the door. The Carver's bar was called the Observatory, which was the sort of name that a certain kind of Manhattan establishment gave itself when it wanted to suggest that drinking there was a cultural experience. It was a long, low-lit room with dark wood paneling, leather seating, and a back bar lined with bottles illuminated from below. And at 10:15 on a Thursday night, it was about half full with the kind of people who ended up in hotel bars on weeknights, traveling executives, couples having quiet conversations over expensive glasses of something, a few solitary drinkers who looked like they'd been there for a while and had no particular plans to leave. Vivian sat at the bar. She ordered bourbon, Blanton's, neat, because she was having a catastrophic couple of weeks, and she was going to be adult about it. And she drank it slowly, watching the room in the mirror behind the bottles, trying to feel something other than the compressed, airless grief that had been sitting in her chest since the phone call from her mother. The first drink helped. The second helped more. She was halfway through the third when the man sat down 2 stools to her left. She noticed him the way you notice things you weren't looking for, peripherally, without intention. He was somewhere in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a sport coat that had probably cost more than her monthly rent, and a loosened tie that suggested he'd started the evening in more formal circumstances. His face was red in the way of someone who had been drinking steadily for several hours. He had the particular aggressive energy of a man who was used to being the loudest person in whatever room he occupied. She turned back to her drink. She wasn't looking for company. He apparently didn't require an invitation. "You look like you've had a hell of a night," he said. Not unpleasant. Conversational. "I'm fine," she said, which was not even close to true but was the socially acceptable thing to say. "Sure." He signaled the bartender for another drink. Something amber, generous pour. "I'm Marcus Webb. I'm in private equity. You?" "Not interested," Vivian said pleasantly. Marcus Webb laughed like that was funny. "Come on, I'm not hitting on you. I'm just bored." He glanced at her sideways. "What are you drinking?" "Bourbon?" "Good choice." He got his drink. Took a long swallow. "So what do you do?" She considered not answering. She answered anyway because the bourbon was making everything slightly softer around the edges and she was tired of her own thoughts. "Public relations." "PR." He nodded. "Corporate stuff?" "Mostly." "You any good at it?" "Very," she said, because whatever else she wasn't sure of right now, she was sure of that. He looked at her then. Actually looked at her, the appraising look that she recognized from years of professional and social rooms, the look that calculated and concluded. She felt it the way you felt weather changing. "You know," he said, and his voice had shifted slightly, the pleasantness taking on an edge she recognized and didn't like. "I'm surprised you're in PR. You've got the face for it, but..." He gestured vaguely, a loose, bourbon-enabled gesture toward the rest of her. "I think you'd have gone for something less visible." She looked at him. He seemed to find this amusing. "I mean, image-based industry, right? You gotta have the whole package." The bar wasn't loud, but it felt like it went quiet around them. Or maybe it was just that her own blood got very still. "I have the whole package," she said quietly. Sure. He waved a hand. "I'm just saying, you know how it is. In certain industries..." He was smiling now. That particular smile she'd seen on men like this her entire life. The smile that believed it was doing her a favor by being honest with her. First impressions count, and there's a certain type that... That what? She said. Very flat, very calm. He laughed. He actually laughed, a little, like it was obvious, and looked back at his drink. Look, I'm just being real. You know what I mean. In rooms full of a certain kind of client, the bar went quiet. Not because she said anything, because someone else walked in. She felt it before she saw it. A change in the room's atmosphere, the way barometric pressure dropped before a storm, a subtle adjustment in the way people held themselves, a slight orientation toward the door. The bartender, who had been professionally disinterested for the entire evening, looked up. The couple 2 tables back stopped talking. Even Marcus Webb, mid-sentence, seemed to register something and turned slightly in his stool. She turned too. He was standing just inside the entrance, 6'2", maybe 3, dark suit, no tie, the kind of cut that didn't announce itself. Dark hair, some gray at the temples. The face of a man who had seen enough of the world to have stopped being surprised by most of it. He was perhaps 45, perhaps older. It was hard to tell, and the difficulty felt deliberate, like even his age declined to be pinned down. He scanned the room with the unhurried attention of someone who had never once in his life needed to rush anything. His eyes settled on the bar, on Marcus Webb, on Vivian. He crossed the room without appearing to hurry and stopped a few feet away, looking at Marcus Webb with an expression that was entirely, chillingly neutral. "You're in my seat," he said. Marcus Webb blinked, looked at the empty stool between himself and Vivian, looked at the other empty stools further down the bar, laughed nervously. "There's like 5 open seats, man. That one." Marcus Webb looked at the stool again, looked at the man. Something moved across his face. A recalculation, rapid and uncomfortable. He picked up his drink without another word and moved to the far end of the bar. The man sat down in the stool 2 away from Vivian, the one Marcus Webb had just vacated. He didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the back bar, apparently deciding what he wanted, and then he signaled the bartender with 2 fingers. "Your usual, Mr. DeLuca," the bartender said. Not a question. "And whatever she's having," the man said, looking at Vivian now. She looked back at him. She was not easily unsettled. Her entire career depended on not being easily unsettled. But there was something in the directness of that look, the quality of it, that required her to take a breath before responding. "I don't need you to buy me a drink. I know you don't." His voice was even, low, without particular affect. I wanted to apologize for what that man was saying. He doesn't speak for anyone in this room. She held his gaze for a moment. "I've heard worse." "I'm sure you have." He accepted his drink from the bartender. Neat, something dark, she couldn't tell what. "That doesn't mean you should have to hear it at all." She studied him. She was good at reading people. It was the foundation of her entire professional life. And what she read in this man was something she didn't have an immediate category for. He wasn't performing. He wasn't attempting anything. He was simply sitting there saying what he meant, in a bar where the room had reorganized itself around his entrance, with the particular quality of stillness that belonged to men who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. "Roman DeLuca," he said, and extended a hand. She shook it. His grip was brief and firm. "Vivian Ashcroft." "Vivian." He said it once, as though filing it somewhere. "What are you drinking about?" She almost laughed. Not at him, at the directness of the question, the way it landed without preamble or social cushioning. "That's pretty blunt." "Most things worth saying are." She looked at her glass. At the amber liquid she'd been using all night as a buffer between herself and the specific shape of what she was actually feeling. She thought about giving him the professional answer, the managed answer, the answer she'd been giving everyone for 2 weeks. She gave him the real one instead. "My fiancé ended our engagement 3 weeks ago because he said I didn't fit the image he needed for his career." She paused, took a sip of the bourbon that had just appeared in front of her. Different bottle. Better bottle, she noticed. "I found out last week that he'd been sleeping with my sister for 7 months. They're getting married in 3 weeks, at a very expensive estate on Long Island." She set the glass down. "So I'm drinking about that." Roman DeLuca looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me about him." Not "I'm sorry." Not "that's terrible." Not any of the sympathy-adjacent things people said when they wanted to move past the uncomfortable fact of someone else's pain as quickly as possible. "Tell me about him." She told him. She hadn't intended to tell him everything. She'd intended to give him the summary, the edited, presentable version that left out the worst of the texture of it. But there was something in the quality of his attention, the way he listened without fidgeting, without waiting for his turn to speak, without any of the impatience she was accustomed to from men who were used to being the most important person in their own narrative. There was something in all of that which made the edited version feel impossible. So she told him about the kitchen table and the talking points and the way Graham had straightened his collar. She told him about the 7 months and the phone call from her mother and what Celeste's text had said. She told him about the Whitmore estate and the social column and the Vera Wang sample. She told him about going back to the office every day and holding it together with her hands and her competence and her complete refusal to let anyone see the extent of the damage. She told him more than she'd told anyone, and she was aware of doing it, aware of the slight strangeness of telling this much to a stranger in a hotel bar at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. And she told him anyway because there was something that felt like relief in it, the specific relief of being witnessed. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer perspective. He asked occasional questions, precise ones, about Graham's position at the firm, about the name of the estate, about the social dynamics of the Whitaker family, and he listened to the answers the same way he'd listened to everything else, with complete, unhurried attention. When she finished, she felt slightly hollowed out and unexpectedly better. She realized she'd been nursing the same glass of bourbon for the last 40 minutes. "He's a coward," Roman said. "Yes," she agreed. "He is. And your sister. She stopped, reconsidered. She had enough honesty left in her to use it. "She's always wanted what I had. Not because she wanted the specific things, just because they were mine." She paused. "And I spent 29 years telling myself that was a normal sibling thing and not seeing it clearly." Roman looked at her. "You see it clearly now. I see everything clearly now." She said it without satisfaction. Clarity, she had discovered, was not the same thing as comfort. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to make you a proposal." She looked at him. "I'm not really in the market for proposals right now." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. "I want to escort you to the wedding." She stared at him. Not as... He seemed to consider the right phrase. "Not as anything other than what the situation requires. You shouldn't walk into that room alone. You shouldn't walk into that room as anything less than what you actually are." "And what am I, exactly?" She heard the edge in her own voice and was only partially apologetic for it. "Someone who was undervalued by people with poor judgment." He said it the way you stated a fact about weather or geography. "That's not a character flaw." She looked down at her glass. The bar around them had shifted. It was later now, thinner. The couple with their quiet conversation had gone. The solitary drinkers had either left or retreated further into their corners. The bartender was polishing glasses at the far end of the bar with the professional discretion of someone who had not heard a single word of the last hour's conversation. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "You don't know what kind of woman I am. Whether I deserve..." She stopped. "Whether you deserve what?" She shook her head. And then, because the bourbon and the exhaustion and the particular loneliness of the last 3 weeks had worn through her professional armor in a way that 3 weeks of careful management hadn't, she said the true thing. "Whether I deserve to be treated like I matter." Roman DeLuca looked at her for a long, even moment. "You already do," he said. "Whether you let me prove it to you or not." She said nothing. Outside, somewhere in the city, a car alarm started and then stopped. The bar hummed its low, amber hum. "Who are you?" she asked. "Actually," something in his expression shifted slightly. "Not much. A businessman." "That's not what the room did when you walked in." He looked at her with something that might have been, under different circumstances, appreciation. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." She held his gaze. She was good enough at reading rooms to know that what surrounded this man, the deference, the careful repositioning of Marcus Webb, the bartender's recognition, the particular quality of the space that had opened up around him the moment he'd entered. None of that belonged to a businessman, not in the ordinary sense. She was not naive. She was not, despite everything, a woman who could not read a room. She made a decision. "Tell me what the proposal actually involves," she said. He told her. Not all of it at once. He was careful that way, she'd already noticed, giving information in measured installments, never more than the conversation required. But enough. An escort to the Whitmore estate. Appropriate. He emphasized the word without emphasis, which she recognized as its own kind of emphasis. Arrangements. Transportation. Whatever she needed to walk into that room the way she deserved to walk into it. Why? She asked. The only question that actually mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Not calculating. She had enough experience with calculating men to know the difference. Considering. "Because I've watched a lot of men like your ex-fiancé operate for a long time," he finally said. "And occasionally the opportunity arises to provide a correction." She let that sit. "That's not all of it." He looked at her. "No, it's not." He didn't elaborate. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the room, which had continued its careful non-awareness of him, the studied professional neutrality of everyone within earshot. She thought about the Whitmore estate and the 300 guests and Graham's face in that social column photograph, perfectly composed, perfectly placed, and Celeste laughing at something off camera. She thought about what it would mean to walk in there, what it would mean to walk in there like this. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, sitting across a kitchen table while a man explained to her in measured corporate language that she didn't fit. She thought about what it had cost her to absorb that, what it was still costing her. She picked up her glass, set it back down. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need to understand what I'm agreeing to, all of it." "Fair," he said. "I'm not—" She paused. "I'm not looking to be rescued. I don't need someone to fight my battles. I know. I need to walk into that room and be seen as—" She stopped, tried again. "I need them to understand that what they did didn't break me." Roman DeLuca looked at her with those dark, even eyes. "It didn't break you," he said. "That's not the question. The question is whether they know it." She felt something shift in her chest. Not comfort, not warmth. Something more like the sensation of a locked room opening onto a larger space than she'd remembered was there. "You'd have to tell me more about yourself," she said. "Some things," he agreed. "Not everything." "That's not reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you." He said it matter-of-factly. "I'm trying to be honest with you. That's not the same thing." She sat with that. A woman less tired, less ground down, less in possession of 3 weeks of concentrated loss might have thought more carefully about who sat in hotel bars at 11 at night and commanded rooms with their presence and made offers to strangers with the ease of a man who never expected to be refused. She was aware of all of those questions. She stored them. And underneath the questions, underneath the professional caution and the self-protective instinct she'd spent her whole life developing, something else moved. Something that recognized in the careful, unhurried attention of this man, something she had not felt in years, the feeling of being worth someone's full attention. "All right," she said finally. He looked at her. "All right, but I need you to understand something." She met his eyes directly, and she kept her voice steady because she meant this. "I'm not doing this to get him back. I don't want him back. I want him to understand what he gave away. That's different." "I understand the difference." "Good," she said. "Then we can talk about the rest of it." She left the bar at 12:40 with Roman DeLuca's card in her coat pocket, and the particular feeling of having made a decision that was either the best or worst thing she'd done in years, with no immediate way of knowing which. The cold hit her the moment she pushed through the hotel's revolving door. November in Manhattan, the kind of cold that was a physical presence, that walked beside you and breathed on your neck and reminded you that the world was large and indifferent and did not particularly care about your domestic disaster. She pulled her coat tighter and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching a cab navigate the intersection at the far end of the block. She took out the card. Plain white. Just a name, a phone number, no title, no company, no web address. She turned it over, nothing on the back. She had been in enough rooms with enough powerful people to know what that absence of information communicated. She put the card back in her pocket. She'd been home for 40 minutes and was sitting on the edge of her subletter's bed in her coat, staring at the wall with the card still in her pocket, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number, not Graham's. A text message. 3 weeks is enough time, but you'll need a dress. I know someone. If you're ready, we can begin tomorrow. She stared at the message for a long time. Outside the thin walls of the sublet apartment, the city made its sounds. Sirens, a delivery truck, someone's television through the ceiling. The ordinary machinery of a world that had continued operating without any particular regard for the fact that her life had been reconstructed around her. She typed back, "How do you already know my number?" The response came in under a minute. "I know a lot of things. That's not the relevant question." She typed, "What is the relevant question?" A pause, longer this time. Then, "Whether you're ready to stop letting them define the story." She sat there in her coat in the borrowed apartment in the middle of the night with Roman DeLuca's words on her phone screen and the weight of 3 weeks of careful, dignified collapse in her chest. And she thought about the Whitmore estate, and Celeste's laugh, and the way Graham had straightened his collar like a man preparing a speech. And she thought about the woman she'd been when she'd walked into that kitchen, and the woman she'd been when she'd walked out of it. She typed, "Yes." She put the phone face down on the bed. Then she finally took off her coat. She slept 4 hours and woke up with the card still on the nightstand. For a moment, the particular foggy moment before full consciousness assembled itself, she didn't remember any of it. She was just a woman in a borrowed bed in a borrowed apartment with the November light coming gray and thin through the curtains, and the world was neutral, and nothing had happened yet. Then it assembled. Graham, Celeste, the bar, Roman DeLuca. The text she'd sent at 1 in the morning, yes. She sat up and looked at the card, looked at her phone. No new messages. She got up and made coffee in the sublet's small kitchen, the kind of coffee maker that took 4 minutes longer than it should and produced something technically adequate. And she stood at the counter and drank it and thought about what exactly she had agreed to. The honest answer was, she didn't fully know. And the fact that she'd said yes anyway told her something about the state she was in, which was not entirely reassuring. She showered, she dressed, she was reaching for her work bag when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, same one. Address, 14 West 57th Street, 4th floor. Ask for Mara, 9 o'clock. She looked at the time, 8:22. She typed back, "I have work." His response took 40 seconds. "You have 3 weeks. Your work will still be there." She stared at the screen. She thought about the crisis brief she'd filed at 9 the night before, the tech client whose situation was largely stabilized, the 2 account check-ins she had scheduled for this afternoon. She thought about Diane, her assistant, who was entirely capable of rescheduling things without explanation. She typed to Diane, "Something came up. Push my afternoon. I'll be in by 2. She put on her coat and left. 14 West 57th was an unmarked building with a polished brass door handle and a small intercom panel. She pressed the button for the 4th floor, and a woman's voice said simply, "Ashcroft," and the door buzzed open. The elevator was small and paneled in dark wood, and it opened onto a space that was not what she'd expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she had expected. It was an atelier, a working one, not the performative kind that existed to impress clients before overcharging them. Bolts of fabric were stacked along one wall. A cutting table dominated the center of the room, and 2 women were working in the far corner over a dress form with the quiet intensity of people doing something that required their whole attention. Mara was perhaps 60, small, with white hair cut very short, and the posture of someone who had spent decades standing at work tables. She looked at Vivian the way a carpenter looked at a piece of wood. Not unkindly, but with assessment, professional, unflinching. "Take off the coat," Mara said. Not unkindly, just direct. Vivian took off the coat. Mara walked around her once. Completely. Without speaking. Her eyes moved in the particular way of someone calculating. Not judging, calculating. There was a difference, and Vivian had enough experience with the other kind to recognize its absence here. "You have excellent posture," Mara said. "Most women your size don't stand right. They apologize with their shoulders." "I don't apologize," Vivian said. "No." Mara studied her. "I can see that." She turned and went to a rack along the far wall, moving through hanging garments with the confident speed of someone who knew exactly what was there. "You're going to a wedding reception. Long Island. 3 weeks." She pulled 2 things off the rack without hesitation. Not trying to disappear, not trying to provoke, trying to arrive. "Yes," Vivian said. "Exactly that." Mara held up the first garment, emerald green, floor length, with a structure to the bodice that looked architectural. "This one," she said. Vivian looked at it. The green was deep, almost dark, not the kind of color that asked permission. "Where does Roman find people like you?" Mara set the second garment aside without particular ceremony. "He doesn't find people," she said. "People find him, and then they stay. Because he's the only man in this city who pays what he promises and doesn't ask for more than he's owed." She said it with the matter-of-fact quality of someone reciting a known truth. "Try the dress." Oh. She was back at the office by 1:30, not 2. The dress was being altered. Mara had also made 3 phone calls while Vivian was still in the room. Quiet, efficient calls that apparently set additional things in motion. And had handed Vivian a small card with an address and a time for Saturday morning. "Jewelry," Mara had said, by way of explanation, and then returned to the cutting table. Vivian sat at her desk and looked at her email without reading it for about 90 seconds. Then she called Diane in. "I need the next 3 weeks managed carefully," she said. "Nothing after 6. Nothing on the 22nd. The wedding was the 22nd. Diane, who had worked for Vivian for 3 years and had the professional discretion of someone who'd learned early that the details of her boss's life were not her business, simply nodded and made a note. "Done. Is there anything else?" "No, thank you." Diane left. Vivian looked at her screen, then she picked up her phone and did the thing she'd been not doing for 3 weeks. She called her mother. Patricia picked up on the second ring. "Vivian?" "I'm going to the wedding," Vivian said. Silence. Long enough to count. "I don't think that's—" "I'm not asking your opinion," Vivian said, calmly. No edge in it, just clarity. "I'm letting you know, because you'll hear about it." Another silence. Different quality. "Hear about it how?" "I'll be bringing someone," Vivian said. "Who?" She thought about how to answer that. "Someone you should know about before you read it somewhere else." She paused. "His name is Roman DeLuca." The silence that followed was the longest yet. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had a new texture. Careful, in the way of someone choosing their footing on uncertain ground. "Vivian, do you understand who that man is?" "I understand enough." "You understand—" Her mother stopped. Started again with the controlled precision of a woman who had spent 60 years managing her public presentation. "That is not a man you bring to a family event." "He's not family," Vivian said. "He's my guest." "Vivian, I have a meeting." She didn't, but that wasn't the point. "I'll see you at the wedding." She ended the call, sat back, her hands were steady. She noticed that. She'd expected them not to be. She met with Roman that evening. He'd texted her an address, a restaurant in the West Village, small, unmarked, the kind of place that had 12 tables and a waiting list that didn't officially exist. She arrived exactly on time and was taken immediately to a corner table where he was already seated, his jacket on the back of the chair, a glass of water untouched in front of him, reading something on his phone that he put away the moment she appeared. She sat down. "I called my mother," she said by way of opening. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "How?" "Your mother called someone who called me, approximately 40 minutes after your conversation." He said it without any particular emphasis. "She wanted to know if I was aware of what I was getting involved in." Vivian stared at him. "She called you." "She's a practical woman." He picked up the menu, glanced at it, set it down. He already knew what he was ordering. "She said you were making an impulsive decision from a place of grief and she didn't want your—" A pause, small and precise. "Your situation to become an embarrassment." "My situation," Vivian repeated. Her word. Something moved through her that was not quite anger and not quite sadness, and was very closely related to the feeling of seeing something clearly that you'd been refusing to look at for a long time. Her mother had been managing the narrative of Vivian's life since Vivian was old enough to have one. She'd been managing it in the direction of tidy, of acceptable, of nothing that reflects badly on the family. She'd been doing it at the expense of her elder daughter for 34 years and calling it concern. "What did you tell her?" Vivian asked. "That you were an adult woman who made her own decisions and that I'd be at the wedding?" She looked at him. His expression was the same even, unhurried thing it had been in the bar. Not quite readable, not entirely closed. Just like that. Just like that. She was quiet for a moment, watching him. "You realize what you're walking into. These people, my family, the Whitakers, the people who will be at that reception, they're not going to be polite about you." "I know. They're going to assume things about me, about why I'm there, about what we—" She stopped. "They're going to tell a story about it. They're going to tell a story regardless," Roman said. "The only variable is which story." He looked at her steadily. "Right now they're telling the one where you're the woman who lost. Would you rather give them a different one?" She sat with that. The waiter came. Roman ordered for both of them without asking, which under any other circumstances she'd have corrected on principle. But everything he ordered was exactly right, which was either a guess or a level of prior research that she chose not to examine too closely in this particular moment. "I need to understand the terms," she said when the waiter had gone. "If I'm doing this, ask." "What do you get out of it?" He looked at her for a moment. The candle on the table threw shadows across the planes of his face. "An evening of good company," he said, "and the particular satisfaction of watching a man like Graham Whitaker understand what he gave away." "That's not enough," she said. "Not for someone like you. You don't put this level of—" She gestured, meaning the dress, the atelier, Mara's phone calls, all of it. "You don't do this for an evening satisfaction." He looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something in his expression that was not quite the controlled, unhurried surface he presented to the world. Something underneath, brief and quickly recovered. "No," he said, "it's not enough." "Then what?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the West Village did its evening thing. People walking dogs, a couple arguing quietly, the ordinary texture of the city living its life. Then he said, "I've been in rooms full of men like Graham Whitaker my entire career. Men who decide what a person is worth based on what they look like and who they're standing next to. Men who discard things of value because they can't see past their own narrow idea of what value looks like." "Bah?" He paused. "I find it offensive." "That's personal," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She waited. He didn't continue. She filed that, the information and the fact of his not continuing. "All right," she said. "Second question. What you do, your business." She chose the word carefully. "Is there anything about it that's going to make the 22nd more complicated than it needs to be?" He looked at her for a long, even moment. "Probably," he said. "Yes." She appreciated the honesty enough to keep going. "Can you be more specific?" "Some people at that reception will recognize me. There will be reactions." He said it the way you said it will be cold, bring a coat. "None of them will be a problem." "How do you know?" "Because I said so." It should have been arrogant. It wasn't. It was the flat declarative certainty of someone whose relationship with consequences was different from most people's. Not indifference, exactly. More like the confidence of a man who had mapped every available territory and found nothing he hadn't already accounted for. She decided to believe him. For now. "Okay," she said. "Third question." "You can stop numbering them," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She saw him 3 more times in the following 10 days. The jewelry appointment on Saturday, a private room in a building on 48th Street, a jeweler named Ellis who laid things out on velvet trays and spoke to Roman in the abbreviated language of a long-standing professional relationship. Vivian sat in a low chair and watched emeralds and diamonds get placed near her collarbone and removed and replaced while Roman stood slightly to the side with his arms crossed, watching, until she looked at something in the mirror a particular way, and he said that one, to Ellis, without looking at her for confirmation. "You could ask me," she said. "I did ask you," he said. "You've been looking at that necklace the same way for the last 4 minutes." She looked at the necklace in the mirror. It was a single teardrop emerald in a diamond setting, simple enough to be elegant, significant enough to be unmistakable. He was right. She had been looking at it. She didn't tell him he was right, but she didn't tell Ellis to put it away either. The second time was a Thursday. Dinner again, different restaurant, same neighborhood. This time the conversation was less strategic and more, she noticed the shift and didn't entirely know what to do with it, personal. He asked about her work with the specific, informed curiosity of someone who had done background reading but wanted the texture behind the facts. She told him about the cases she was proud of, the ones that had required actual creativity rather than just application of formula. He listened with the same quality of attention he'd given everything else. "You like the work," he said. Not a question. "I love the work," she said. "I'm good at it and I love it. Those don't always go together." "No," he agreed. "They don't." She looked at him across the table. "What about you? What about me? Do you love it? Whatever it is you do." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm good at it," he said. "Whether I love it?" He paused. "It's been a long time since I thought about it in those terms." She filed that too. The third time was different. She'd been walking home from the office, 8 o'clock, later than she'd intended, the kind of evening where the cold was clear rather than brutal, the city lights doing their thing against the dark sky, when she turned a corner on 48th and nearly walked directly into Celeste. Her sister was standing outside a restaurant with a woman Vivian didn't recognize, laughing at something, wearing a cream coat that probably cost $4,000, and the particular glow of a woman at the exact center of the life she'd always wanted. She looked up just as Vivian registered her, and for a moment they were both completely still. The woman Celeste was with looked between them with the bright, uncomfortable alertness of someone who could feel a weather system forming. "Viv," Celeste said. Her voice landed soft, careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this encounter. "Celeste," Vivian said. Celeste started. "I've been wanting to—" "Don't," Vivian said. Very quiet, very flat. Celeste's expression shifted. Something moved across it. Not quite guilt, not quite defiance, the complex amalgam of a person who has done something indefensible and has found a way to live with it. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," Vivian said, and discovered, saying it, that it was true. She wasn't angry. She was something past anger, something colder, more structural, something that lived in the place where trust used to be. "I hope the wedding is everything you planned." Celeste blinked. "Vivian, I'll see you there," Vivian said. She walked past. She kept her pace steady, didn't accelerate, didn't look back. She made it to the end of the block before she took a breath that was slightly longer than normal, and then she kept walking. She texted Roman from the street. "I just ran into her." His response came in under a minute. "How are you?" She stopped walking, stood on the sidewalk with people moving past her in both directions, and looked at the question. Such a simple question. The kind of question that sounded like small talk until you were standing in the dark on a November street with your heart doing something complicated in your chest, and then it felt like the only question. She typed, "I'm okay." I meant what I said to her. "I'm actually okay." A pause. Then, "Good." She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. 3 days before the wedding, the dress arrived. Mara's assistant brought it to the sublet apartment in a garment bag. Long, dark, with a weight to it that you could feel when you unzipped it. Vivian took it out and held it up in the small bedroom's light, and then she put it on. She stood in front of the mirror. She had spent a very long time, most of her adult life, if she was being honest with herself, which she was getting better at, looking at herself in mirrors the way Graham had looked at her across the kitchen table. With assessment. With the underlying question of whether she measured up to some standard she'd absorbed so early, she'd stopped questioning its source. The standard that said the body she had wasn't quite the right one, that the space she occupied was slightly more than she was entitled to, that somewhere there was a version of herself that was approved and this was an approximate draft. The woman in the mirror in the emerald dress was not a draft. She stood there for a long time. Then she texted Roman, "The dress is here." A minute passed. Then, "And?" She looked at herself in the mirror. Looked at the woman who had walked out of a kitchen and driven herself to Greenwich and cried for 3 days and then gone to work anyway. The woman who had held it together with competence and refused to let any of them see how far the damage went. The woman who had sat in a hotel bar on a Thursday night and told the truth to a stranger because there was nothing left to lose by telling it. She typed, "I think they're going to regret what they did." His response took 30 seconds. "I know they are." She was staring at that, still in the emerald dress, when her phone rang. Graham. She looked at his name on the screen. She had not spoken to him in 3 weeks. She had let all 14 calls go, and then there had been a few more after that, and she'd let those go too. She did not know why he was still calling. She did not particularly want to know. She let it ring. It rang 4 more times and went to voicemail. Then immediately, before the voicemail notification had even fully appeared, it rang again. She looked at the screen. Graham. Again. She answered. "What?" she said. A pause on the other end, like he hadn't expected her to pick up. Like he'd been prepared for voicemail and the actual fact of her voice had temporarily derailed him. "Viv." His voice was lower than she remembered, tight. "I need to talk to you." "You have about 30 seconds, she said. "Make it count." "I heard—" He stopped. "I heard you're coming to the wedding." She said nothing. "With someone." He was working hard to keep his voice neutral. She could hear the effort. "With Roman DeLuca." Silence on her end. "Vivian." His voice changed, went harder. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? That man is—" "Careful," she said. "Graham, be very careful." A beat. "He's dangerous. You don't know who you're dealing with." "And you do?" "I know enough." He was losing the neutral. The tight thing underneath it was showing. "I know enough to know that whatever he told you, whatever he—" He stopped. Started again. "He's using you. He's using you to get to me, to get to the Whitaker family. There's a reason he—" "Graham?" She kept her voice flat. "Why are you calling me?" Silence. "Why are you calling me?" she said again. 3 weeks before your wedding to my sister. Why?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had changed again, gone to something she hadn't heard from him in a long time, something raw and unmanaged that she recognized from the early years, before the ambition fully calcified around him. "Because I made a mistake," he said. I let something important go because I was thinking about the wrong things. Stop, she said, afraid of what it would cost me, and Graham." Her voice was very quiet now. "Stop talking." He stopped. "You are marrying my sister in 3 days, she said. "You chose this. Every step of it you chose, and now you're calling me because you heard I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being the woman you discarded." She paused. "That's what this is. You're not calling because you made a mistake. You're calling because someone else is treating me like I matter, and you can't stand it." Silence on the line, long silence. She could hear him breathing. "Don't call me again," she said. She ended the call. She stood in the emerald dress in the small, borrowed bedroom, and she felt the specific, vertiginous sensation of a ground shift. Not dramatic, not sudden, but absolute. The feeling of a door closing on something that had needed closing for a very long time, and the air on the other side of it being, to her surprise, clean. That was the word she'd been reaching for, standing in the emerald dress in the borrowed apartment with Graham's last breath still on the phone line. The air on the other side of that closed door was clean. Not happy, not triumphant, just clean, the way a room was clean after you opened the windows and let the stale thing out. She took the dress off carefully, hung it back in the garment bag, went to the kitchen and made tea she didn't particularly want, and stood at the counter drinking it in the dark, not turning on the light, watching the city through the window do its 11 o'clock business. She thought, 3 more days. She thought, I'm ready. She was wrong. Right. The call came at 7:14 the following morning. She was already up, already dressed, coffee in hand, sitting at the small table with her laptop open to 3 client emails she was working through before heading to the office. The number on the screen was one she recognized. Her father's cell, which he used approximately 4 times a year, always for information he considered too important for her mother to deliver. She answered, Dad? Vivian. Edward Ashcroft's voice was the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in corporate law. Measured, constructed, every word placed with the precision of someone who understood that language was a tool and tools had consequences. I need you to hear something before you hear it from someone else. She set down the coffee. Tell me. There's a journalist, he said. A woman named Carla Reyes. She writes for the Tribune's business section. She's been making calls. A pause. About you. Vivian went still. About me, specifically. About you and DeLuca. The name landed with the careful weight of a man who had also done his background reading. She's working on a piece. The angle is, she's framing it as a profile of DeLuca's associates, people he's connected to, people who... He paused. People who may have exposure to certain investigations currently ongoing. The coffee cup was cold in her hand. What investigations? Federal? Another pause. Vivian, I need you to tell me honestly, how deep into this are you? I've had dinner with him 4 times, she said. He's escorting me to a wedding. Silence on the line, her father processing. She could hear it, the legal mind sorting through implications. That may not be the way it gets written, he said finally. What does she have? I don't know everything. I know she has photographs, you and DeLuca leaving a restaurant, the jeweler's on 48th. She has your name connected to his, and she has... He stopped, started again. She has a source, someone who gave her your name specifically, someone who knew you'd been with him. Vivian sat very still. I don't know who, her father said, but this didn't come from a journalist doing general research. Someone pointed her at you. She thought about that. She thought about who knew. Mara, who had no reason. Ellis the jeweler, the restaurants. The bartender at the Carver, possibly. Her mother, who had called Roman directly and had the specific managed anxiety of a woman trying to contain a situation. She thought about Graham, who had called her 2 nights ago with that raw, unmanaged voice, who had said, I know enough about Roman DeLuca, who had known she was coming to the wedding, who was marrying a woman in 2 days and could not stop calling the one he'd thrown away. When does it run? She asked. She told her editor by end of week. That's after the wedding, Vivian said. Yes, but the calls she's making, people are already talking. By Saturday night, the reception will... I know, she said. Dad. Yes. Did you call Roman DeLuca? A pause. Very brief. No. Did Mom? Longer pause. I can't speak to what your mother has done, he said, which was not a denial. She ended the call. She sat at the small table with the cold coffee and the open laptop, and she looked at the 3 client emails she'd been working through. A tech CEO's damage control, a pharmaceutical company's media strategy, a politician's prepared statement, and she thought about the particular expertise required to understand that information was a weapon, and that the person who controlled the narrative controlled the outcome. She thought about who had given Carla Reyes her name. She picked up her phone and called Roman. Debt. He answered on the second ring. I already know, he said. She absorbed that. How long have you known? Since last night. I have people who monitor certain things. And you didn't tell me. A pause. I was going to tell you this morning. Roman. She kept her voice even. It cost something. If I'm going to be in this, whatever this is, I need to know things when you know them, not when you decide I'm ready to hear them. Silence. Then quietly, you're right. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected the apology. It landed differently because of that. She let it sit for a moment and then moved past it because there were more important things. Who gave her my name? I have a strong suspicion, he said. I want to confirm it before I tell you. Tell me your strong suspicion. Another pause. Graham, he said. She'd known. She'd known from the moment her father said someone pointed her at you. She'd known the way you knew the shape of a familiar betrayal. Not surprised, just sickeningly confirmed. Graham, who had called 2 nights ago with that raw voice, who had told her Roman was using her, who had been terrified enough by what was coming that he'd picked up a phone and tried to blow it up before it arrived. He's trying to bury the story before the wedding, she said. If there's a piece connecting me to a federal investigation, I don't show up. Or I show up damaged. Yes. And the wedding goes exactly the way he planned it. Him and Celeste, 300 guests, the social columns, the whole performance. She paused. He panicked when he found out you'd be there. He panicked, Roman confirmed. He made calls. He has a contact at the Tribune, a source relationship he's maintained for 3 years. He gave your name and mine and enough texture to make it worth Rhea's pursuing. She stood up from the table, moved to the window. The city was fully alive at 7:30, the street below already dense with people and purpose, everyone moving with the particular focused urgency of Manhattan mornings. Can it be stopped? The piece? A pause. Probably. I have options there. I don't want it stopped, she said. Silence. I want to know what's actually in it, she said. I want to know what the federal investigation actually is. I want to know what my exposure actually looks like if someone decided to make a case that I'm connected to you. She paused. And I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. Not the version you decide I can handle. A long silence this time, long enough that she turned from the window and looked at her phone to confirm the call was still connected. It was. Dinner tonight, he said finally. 7 o'clock. I'll tell you everything. Not a restaurant, she said. Somewhere private. Another pause. All right. He sent a car. She'd half expected that, and she'd half expected the address it took her to. A building in Tribeca, not far from the apartment she'd shared with Graham, which felt like the kind of irony the city specialized in. A high floor, private elevator, the kind of apartment that communicated its cost without announcing it, all clean lines and city views, and the particular silence of good insulation and real money. Roman was in the kitchen when she arrived, actually in the kitchen, jacket off, sleeves rolled, doing something at the stove that smelled like it involved garlic and something slow-cooked. She stood in the entryway for a moment and looked at him in this different context, this domestic one, and felt the slight disorientation of a person encountering a known landscape from an unfamiliar angle. Sit down, he said, without turning around. 10 minutes. She sat at the kitchen island, looked around the apartment. It was not what she would have imagined, though she'd told herself not to imagine. There were books, real ones, not decorative, the kind with broken spines and margin notes. A framed architectural drawing on the far wall. A chess set on a side table with a game in progress. Both sides mid-game, which meant he played against himself or had someone who came and went. He brought 2 plates and set them down and sat across from her and said, Ask. The federal investigation, she said. What is it? Tax fraud and wire fraud, a secondary money laundering component. He said it the way you said the traffic on the FDR. Factual, not particularly distressed. It's been ongoing for approximately 18 months. I have attorneys managing it. Are you going to be indicted? He looked at her. I don't know yet. She absorbed that. And your actual business? Real estate, he said. Legitimate real estate. I also have interests in several private equity concerns and 2 hospitality properties. A pause. And I have other interests that are more, he seemed to consider the precise word, complicated. The kind that room's clear for when you walk in, she said. Yes. The kind that federal investigators find interesting. The kind that federal investigators have been finding interesting for about a decade, he said, without sufficient success to charge anything. She looked at him. She looked at the chess game in progress on the side table. She looked at the books with the broken spines. She looked at this man who had come into her life 3 weeks ago in a hotel bar and offered her something she hadn't been able to refuse, and she thought about what her father's voice had sounded like on the phone this morning, and what Graham had done and what was going to happen at the Whitmore estate in 2 days. If I go to that wedding with you, she said, and there's a federal piece with my name in it running at the end of the week, what does that do to my career? He was quiet. Tell me honestly, she said. It depends on how the piece is framed, he said. If it's accurate, if it says you're a woman who attended a public event as someone's guest, there's no real exposure. You've done nothing. You have nothing to hide. He paused. If it's framed the way Graham wants it framed, as a knowing association with someone under investigation, another pause. It could create complications. Complications? She repeated. Short-term, manageable. Roman. She set down her fork. I've spent 10 years building my professional reputation. I have clients who operate in regulated industries. I have a partnership track that depends on the managing partners not seeing my name next to the words federal investigation in the Tribune. She kept her voice steady because she needed it steady. Short-term manageable is not the same as harmless. He looked at her, and she saw it again, Jacim, the thing underneath the controlled surface, brief and quickly covered, but there. Something that looked like the specific pain of a person watching a consequence they knew was coming arrive exactly when expected. No, he said, it isn't. She stood up. She wasn't sure why. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up, the particular physical need to not be sitting down for what she was about to say. I need to know something, she said, and I need you to understand that I'm not asking to be managed. I'm asking because it matters. Ask. Did you know when you offered to do this, when you sat down in that bar and made that proposal, did you know that associating with you publicly was going to create this kind of risk for me? The silence in the apartment was the kind that had weight. Yes, he said. She'd known the answer. She'd known it the way she'd known Graham's voice on the phone was fear, not regret. She'd known it and asked anyway because she needed to hear it in his voice. She stood there with the kitchen island between them and the city spread out beyond the windows and the chess game unfinished on the side table, and she felt something she hadn't expected, not anger, not betrayal exactly. Something more complicated. The feeling of a person who had made a choice with incomplete information and had to now decide what to do with the complete version. Why? She said. He stood up from the other side of the island. He didn't come around it. He just stood there, same distance, and he looked at her with the most unguarded expression she'd seen from him. Because I thought the benefit outweighed the risk, he said, and because He stopped, looked at the counter for a moment, looked back up. Because I wanted to do it. And I let wanting to do it outweigh complete transparency about the cost. That was wrong. She held that. And now? She said. Now I'm telling you the complete cost, he said, and you decide. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he didn't fill the silence, which she registered. His patience with silence, the way he didn't rush it, didn't manage it, didn't treat her discomfort as a problem to be solved. Graham did this on purpose, she said finally. Not a question. Yes, he called a journalist he's had in his pocket for 3 years and gave her my name specifically so that by the time I showed up at his wedding, I'd be too damaged or too scared or too... She stopped. He tried to bury me. Again. Just with a different shovel. Yes, Roman said. She looked at the chess game. She looked at the board for a long moment. The pieces in their mid-game positions, both sides exposed, both sides with strategies only partially revealed. Then she looked at Roman DeLuca across the kitchen island. I'm going to the wedding, she said. Something in his expression shifted. Vivian, I'm going, she said. But not the way we planned it. He looked at her carefully. What do you mean? She turned toward the window. Outside, the Tribeca streets were doing their evening thing. Restaurants filling up, the particular amber light of the city settling in for the night. She thought about Carla Reyes making phone calls. She thought about Graham sitting somewhere across this city, possibly satisfied, believing he'd done enough to contain the situation. He handed me a journalist, she said. He handed me a woman who is currently building a piece with both our names in it. Who has sources? She turned back to Roman. I'm a PR professional. Do you understand what that means? Roman looked at her. I know how to flip a narrative, she said. I do it for a living. And right now there is a story about Graham Whitaker that needs to be told before he walks out of that reception on Saturday night believing he won. She paused. You said you have evidence of what he's done. Financially. You mentioned it when we first talked. I have documentation, Roman said, carefully. Yes. I want to see it, she said. Tonight. He didn't move for a moment. He looked at her with that full, unhurried attention. Then he said, if I show you that, if we move in that direction, it changes the shape of what Saturday is. I know, she said. It goes from a personal reclamation to something significantly larger, he said. It creates exposure for both of us. It will be, he paused, irreversible. Graham made it irreversible when he called Carla Reyes, she said. I'm not interested in going to that wedding anymore to be seen. I'm going to finish it. She met his eyes. All of it. Is that something you can help me do? Roman DeLuca looked at the woman standing in his kitchen in the November light with the city behind her, and something in her eyes that had not been there 3 weeks ago in the Carver bar. Something forged, tempered, no longer asking permission from anyone for anything. He said, yes. He went to the desk in the corner of the room and opened the bottom drawer and brought back a manila folder that was thick enough to suggest it had been assembled over a long time by someone with a specific purpose. He set it on the island between them. She opened it. The first document was a wire transfer record. The second was an account statement from an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The third was an email chain between Graham and a colleague at Calder Merritt that read, in the flat language of people who believed they were being careful, like a detailed record of systematic theft from client accounts spanning 4 years. She read it all. Every page. She was methodical and she was fast, and her face was completely still the entire time. The professional stillness of someone processing information for tactical purposes rather than emotional ones. When she finished, she closed the folder. She looked up at Roman. He's been stealing from his own clients, she said. For 4 years, Roman said, approximately $11 million across 37 accounts. She put her hand flat on the folder. How long have you had this? A pause. Long enough? Roman. Her voice went very quiet. How long? He held her gaze. 8 months, he said. She went still. 8 months. 2 months before Graham had ended their engagement. 3 months before Graham had told Celeste she fit. 8 months of Roman DeLuca sitting on documentation of Graham Whitaker's crimes, waiting for the right moment, or the right reason, or something she couldn't fully name yet from where she was standing. Why didn't you go to the authorities 8 months ago? She said. Because what I wanted to do with it, he said slowly, required the right moment and the right circumstance. He paused. I told you in the restaurant, men like Graham Whitaker operate in rooms I've been in my entire career. I've watched it for a long time. The money he took, the clients he stole from, some of them are people I have relationships with, people who were damaged. He paused again. I wanted it done publicly. I wanted it done in a way that couldn't be walked back or quietly settled. She looked at him. A wedding reception, she said. 300 guests. New York's power structure in one room. Yes. You needed an occasion, she said, and then I walked into a bar. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd heard it. I wasn't looking for you specifically, he said. But when I saw what was happening, what he'd done, who he'd left, and how, he stopped. You weren't a means to an end. I want you to understand that. But I was convenient, she said. Not accusatory, just honest. The flat honesty of someone who needed the full map. Yes, he said. At the beginning. A pause. It's not what it is now. She stood there with her hand on the folder full of 4 years of Graham Whitaker's crimes, and she thought about the bar and the emerald dress and Mara's phone calls and dinner in the West Village and a text message sent at 1 a.m. that said yes, because she'd been out of options and out of patience with the version of herself that accepted the terms other people set. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago, standing in the Tribeca apartment that was never hers, making herself smaller in the ways that Graham required, believing that was love. She thought about what Roman had just told her, and she thought about everything it implied about the last 3 weeks, and she stood in his kitchen with the city behind her, and she felt something move through her that was not quite anger, and not quite understanding, and was very specifically the feeling of a person standing at the precise edge of who they used to be, looking down at. The edge was not what she'd expected. She'd expected fear. She'd expected the particular vertigo of someone who had just discovered that the ground beneath the last 3 weeks was more complicated than she'd understood. She'd expected to feel used or manipulated, or at minimum the specific exhaustion of a person who had walked into one situation and found themselves standing inside a completely different one. What she felt instead was clarity, not the brittle, glass-edged clarity of anger. Something deeper. The clarity of a person who has finally seen the full shape of what they're dealing with and finds that the shape, while not what they expected, is something they can work with. She looked at Roman across the island. "I need tonight," she said, "to think, to decide how I want to do this." "Take what you need," he said, "and I need the folder." He pushed it toward her without hesitation. She took it, and she left. She didn't sleep. She spread the documents across the small table in the sublet apartment, and she read them again, more slowly this time, not for the fact of what they contained, but for the structure of it, the shape of the fraud, the paper trail, the specific vulnerabilities in the documentation. She had built her entire career on understanding how information moved through public space, how narratives formed and broke and reformed. She looked at Graham's 4 years of theft the way she looked at a client crisis, not as a moral catastrophe, but as a set of facts with a sequence and a pressure point. By 2 in the morning, she had a legal pad with notes on it and a plan that was either going to work or was going to cost her everything she had left. By 3, she'd made 1 phone call. By 4, she was asleep in her coat at the table. She was at Roman's door at 7:30. He opened it already dressed, coffee in hand, with the expression of a man who had also not slept and had reached some kind of accommodation with that fact. He looked at her, at the legal pad under her arm, at her eyes. He stepped aside to let her in. "I know how we do it," she said, walking past him into the apartment. "Not the way you planned. Better." He closed the door. "Tell me." She put the legal pad on the island and turned to face him. "You were going to show the financial records at the reception, on a screen, in front of 300 people." She paused. "That works. It humiliates him publicly, it destroys the wedding narrative, it hands the story to every journalist in the room. But it's reactive. It lets him, in the aftermath, frame it as an ambush, as a crime boss settling a score. It gives his lawyers room to call it malicious, to question the provenance of the documents, to muddy the water," Roman said. "Yes, you become the villain. The evidence gets tied up. He gets time." She looked at him. "I know how to close that window." He crossed his arms. "Listening. Carla Reyes," she said. "She's already working on a piece with both our names in it. That means she's primed. She's got sources, she's got traction, she is ready to publish." Vivian picked up the legal pad. "But her story is wrong. Right now, the story she has is DeLuca Associate connected to federal probe. I'm going to give her a different story." Roman went very still. "I'm going to call her this morning," Vivian said. "I'm going to sit down with her, and I'm going to give her the financial records with a full chain of custody explanation, and I'm going to give her the story of what Graham Whitaker has been doing for 4 years, and I'm going to do it on the record, with my name attached, before the wedding, so that when we walk into that reception tonight, the piece is already filed." She paused. "It doesn't run until she clears it with her editor, probably Sunday morning, but the story is locked. It cannot be killed. And everything that happens at the reception, everything people witness tonight, becomes corroboration for a piece that is already written." The apartment was very quiet. "You'd be the source," Roman said, "on the record." "Yes. That's exposure for you." "I know. If his lawyers go after provenance, I'm a PR professional with a clean record and no financial relationship with Graham Whitaker and no personal benefit from the fraud documentation except the truth," she said. "I'm the cleanest possible source. Better than you, better than anyone connected to the investigation." She held his gaze. "You need a face for this that isn't yours. You need someone who walks into that reception tonight not as Roman DeLuca settling a score, but as Vivian Ashcroft telling the truth about a man who stole from his clients." She paused. "I'm that person." Roman looked at her for a long time. The chess game was still unfinished on the side table. The city beyond the windows was building toward the day. "You understand what happens after," he said, "to you professionally. Even with a clean record, you'll be the woman who burned her ex-fiancé the week of his wedding. They'll write a different story about you than the one you're giving Reyes." "Some of them will," she agreed. "Some of them will write exactly the story I give them. That a woman found out a man was defrauding his clients and told the truth about it." She put the legal pad down. "I've been managing other people's narratives for 10 years. I know how to manage mine. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "You're sure?" "I stopped being unsure at about 2 this morning," she said. "Yes, I'm sure." He looked at her with that full, unhurried attention, and she saw it again, the thing beneath the surface, no longer brief and quickly covered, something that had moved into the open. "Make the call," he said. "Mkamt." Carla Reyes was 31, sharp-boned, with the particular energy of a journalist who had been working a story for weeks and could smell it approaching its resolution. She arrived at the coffee shop on Hudson Street at 9:45 with a recorder and a notebook and the professional wariness of someone who understood that a source calling to offer a better story than the one you had was sometimes a gift and sometimes a trap. She looked at Vivian across the small table, looked at the manila folder. "You're Ashcroft," she said. "Yes," Vivian said. "You called me." "Yes." "Your name is in a piece I'm currently writing." "I know," Vivian said. "That's why I called you. The piece you're writing is wrong." She put her hand on the folder. "The story isn't about Roman DeLuca's associates. The story is about Graham Whitaker." She opened the folder and turned it to face Reyes. 4 years, $11 million, 37 client accounts at Calder Merit Capital. Reyes looked at the first document, then she looked up at Vivian. Her wariness had not disappeared, but something behind it had shifted, the investigative instinct reorienting toward a larger target. "Where did this come from?" "Me," Vivian said. "On the record. These are wire transfer documents from offshore accounts. You have provenance?" "I have a full chain of custody that I'll walk you through this morning." Vivian kept her voice level, professional, the voice she used when she was handling someone who needed to trust her. "I also have email documentation of Graham Whitaker coordinating the transfers with a colleague. I have account statements. I have enough for your lawyers to sign off on publication." Reyes looked at the documents. Then she looked at Vivian with the direct, assessing look of someone doing rapid calculations. "You're his ex-fiancé?" "Yes." "He's getting married tonight?" "Yes." "You understand how this looks?" "I understand exactly how it looks," Vivian said. "That's why I'm sitting here with you instead of calling an anonymous tip line. I want my name on it. I want to be accountable for every word." She paused. "A woman with a personal grievance calls in an anonymous tip. That's a story that can be killed. A woman with documentation who goes on record. That's a different story." Reyes was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the email chain. Her pen was in her hand, but she wasn't writing yet. "The DeLuca angle," she said. "The piece I had. Roman DeLuca is not relevant to the story you should be writing," Vivian said. "Graham Whitaker stole $11 million from his clients. That's the story. The rest is noise that someone fed you to bury the signal." She held Reyes's gaze. "You know that's true." A pause. "Yeah," Reyes said. "I do." She reached over and turned the recorder on. "Start from the beginning." She was back at the sublet by 1. She showered. She did her makeup with the careful precision of someone who understood that how you presented yourself was information, that every choice about appearance communicated something, and she had very specific things she wanted to communicate tonight. She put the emerald dress on. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the woman who had stood in this same spot 3 weeks ago in the borrowed apartment, holding herself together by force of will, managing the visible presentation of a private collapse. The woman in the mirror now was something the collapse had left behind, harder in some places, cleaner in others. Forged. She put on the emerald necklace. The teardrop stone sat at the base of her throat, and the diamonds caught the light, and she looked at it for a moment, and then looked at her own face and thought, "This is what it looks like to stop apologizing." Roman's car arrived at 5:30. They didn't speak much on the drive out to Long Island. The city fell away behind them, and the highway opened up, and the November late afternoon light went orange and then gray, and Roman sat beside her in the back of the car without filling the silence, which she was grateful for. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said. There was only what came next. She watched the landscape change through the window. She thought about Carla Reyes, who had spent 3 hours going through the documentation with her this morning and had called her editor from the coffee shop bathroom and come back to the table with the particular bright, focused energy of a journalist who knew she had something real. The piece was written. It was in editorial hands. It would publish Sunday morning. Whatever happened at the Whitmore estate tonight would not change that. Roman's hand moved on the seat, not toward her, just a slight repositioning. But she was aware of it, the proximity, the fact of him beside her. She thought about what he'd told her last night, about 8 months and the right moment and the right circumstance. She thought about what he'd said, "It's not what it is now." And she thought about whether she believed him, and she thought about the fact that she did believe him and what that meant about her own judgment, which was either much better than she'd thought or was about to cost her significantly. She decided she could afford to find out. The Whitmore estate appeared through the car window as a glow first, the kind of illumination that required serious infrastructure. The whole property lit from below and above. The approach road lined with something that approximated starlight on a budget that most people would find staggering. Iron gates stood open. A valet line was already backed up with cars. Through the windows of the main house, chandeliers blazed. 300 people inside. Graham, Celeste, her parents, the Whitaker family. Colleagues, clients, the specific cross-section of New York's power structure that gathered when money married ambition in a venue worth photographing. The car stopped. "Ready?" Roman said. She looked at the lit-up entrance to the Whitmore estate. She thought about the woman who had walked into the Carver bar 11 days ago with mascara under her eyes and 3 weeks of careful, dignified devastation in her chest, looking for something to numb it with. "I've been ready," she said, "since the kitchen table." They got out. The moment the ballroom doors opened, she felt it. Not heard it, felt it. The way you felt a drop in temperature. The way you felt a room change before you understood why. The specific atmospheric shift of 300 people in formal dress registering something that required recalibration. She didn't look for reactions. She kept her chin level, her pace even, her hand resting in the crook of Roman's arm with the composed ease of a woman who had decided some time ago that she was done making herself small. The emerald dress moved with her. The necklace caught the light from the chandeliers. She looked straight ahead and she let the room come to its own conclusions. She heard Celeste before she saw her. Her sister's laugh, that particular champagne laugh that Vivian had heard her entire life at family gatherings and holiday tables, stopped mid-note, cut off like a cord snapped. She saw Graham from across the room. He was standing with a cluster of men she recognized as Calder Merritt colleagues, champagne in hand, in a tuxedo that had been fitted to make the most of him. He was laughing at something when the doors opened. The laugh died. The color in his face went through several stages: confusion, recognition, a rapid and visible recalculation, and then settled into something that was not quite pale and not quite sick, but was very specifically the look of a man watching a consequence arrive that he had believed he'd successfully prevented. His eyes moved from Vivian to Roman. Roman looked back at him. The quality of that exchange lasted approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something happened that had nothing to do with the ballroom or the chandeliers or the 300 people who were currently doing their Manhattan-trained best to pretend they weren't watching. Something that was entirely between those two men, a communication conducted in the language of men who understood each other's capabilities completely and were now establishing, with perfect clarity, what the terms of the evening were. Graham looked away first. A man materialized at Roman's elbow. Late 50s, silver-haired, with the particular bearing of someone who occupied boardrooms and knew what Roman DeLuca's presence at an event meant for the quality of the evening. He leaned in, said something quietly. Roman listened, responded with 3 words. The man moved away. "Problem?" Vivian said quietly. "Nothing material," Roman said. She took a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She didn't drink it immediately. She carried it, and she moved through the room beside Roman, and she let herself be seen, which was the entire point, which was the thing Graham had spent 11 days trying to prevent. And she felt, with each step through the murmuring crowd, each pair of eyes that tracked them, and then looked away, and then looked back, the specific satisfaction of a narrative being rewritten in real time. Her mother found her at the 20-minute mark. Patricia Ashcroft appeared from the direction of the bar with a flute of white wine and the compressed vertical posture of a woman conducting significant internal management. She looked at Vivian. She looked at Roman. She looked at the dress and the necklace and whatever was visible in her elder daughter's face that had not been visible the last time they'd seen each other. "Vivian," she said, controlled. "Mom." Equally controlled. Patricia's eyes went to Roman. A pause. Mr. DeLuca. Mrs. Ashcroft, Roman said, perfectly civil. Patricia looked at Vivian, and in her eyes, beneath the management, beneath the 60 years of curated presentation, was something Vivian had not seen there in a very long time. Something that looked almost like reassessment. You look, she paused, you look well. I am well, Vivian said. Her mother held her gaze for a moment. Then she said very quietly something that was not an apology and was not nothing. I should have called you after. A pause. I handled it wrong. Vivian looked at her mother. She thought about the phone call and your situation and the 60 years of management applied to the wrong things. She thought about what it cost her mother to say this much, here, in this room. Yes, she said. You did. A pause. We can talk about it later. Her mother nodded once, looked at Roman one more time, moved back into the crowd. The toasts were scheduled for 9. It was 8:43 when Graham found her. He'd been building toward it since she'd walked in. She could feel it the way you could feel weather, the pressure system of him tracking her movement through the room, getting close, and then pulling back. The specific pacing of someone working up to something they knew was a bad idea and couldn't stop themselves from doing anyway. He caught her in a corridor off the main ballroom. Service hallway access, dim, the sounds of the reception muffled behind a closed door. She had stepped out to call Reyes. A brief check, the piece was in editorial, all good. And she was coming back when he stepped in front of her. He looked worse up close than he had from across the room. The tuxedo was still perfect, but his face wasn't. There was something disheveled in his eyes, a quality of a man who had been holding something together by force and was running out of force. We need to talk, he said. We really don't, she said. Vivian. He reached out and took her arm. Not hard, but he took it, his hand on her arm. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. She kept her voice very quiet. Take your hand off me. He let go. Immediately. But he didn't step back. I know what you're doing, he said. I know about Reyes. Someone told me you met with her this morning. Good, she said. The word seemed to hit him unexpectedly. He blinked. Good? I wasn't hiding it, she said. I gave her everything, on the record, with my name attached. She watched his face go through its calculations. It's done, Graham. The piece is written. You have no idea what you've done. His voice cracked at the edges. Do you understand what my clients, my firm, this destroys everything? You destroyed it, she said. 4 years ago, when you decided their money was yours. I just made sure the record was accurate. This is about us, he said. This is you punishing me. This is about 37 people whose accounts you stole from, she said. It was never about us. You're not the point anymore. Something broke in his face. The performance. The 4 years of carefully constructed Graham Whitaker, rising executive, power couple, the event of the season, cracked through the center. Underneath it was something raw and frightened, and she realized deeply familiar. The same man who had sat across a kitchen table and straightened his collar and told her she didn't fit. The same man who had called her at 1 a.m. with a raw voice that she'd briefly, stupidly thought was regret. I made a mistake, he said, and his voice had gone to that raw place again, the unmanaged place. With you. I made... Vivian, I know I... Don't, she said, very flat. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was... Graham, she looked at him directly. You don't get to do this now. You don't get to stand in a hallway at your own wedding and tell me you made a mistake because the mistake wasn't ending the engagement. The mistake was 4 years of telling me I wasn't enough, and the mistake was 7 months of lying, and the mistake was calling a journalist and trying to make sure I couldn't come here tonight. She paused. Her voice was entirely level. You wanted me buried. I'm still standing. That's what you need to understand about tonight. His jaw tightened. The rawness closed over. And underneath it, as it always did with Graham when the management failed, came the other thing. The cruelty that was really just fear wearing a sharper suit. You think he cares about you, he said. DeLuca, you think he's here because... Roman... The voice came from behind Vivian. She turned. Roman was standing at the entrance to the corridor. He hadn't rushed. His pace was even. His expression was the controlled, unhurried thing it always was. But there was something in the quality of his stillness that made the corridor feel significantly smaller than it was. He looked at Graham Whitaker the way a man looked at a minor obstacle, not with contempt, not with anger, with the particular absence of either that was somehow worse than both. "The toasts are starting," Roman said. To Vivian, completely ignoring Graham. Graham's breathing had changed. She could hear it, slightly elevated, the sound of a man's nervous system making a rapid and unfavorable assessment of the situation. "You have no right to be here," he said to Roman. His voice was lower now, trying to find the authority in it and not entirely succeeding. "This is a private event." "Graham!" Roman looked at him for the first time. Just looked. For approximately 3 seconds, which felt considerably longer. "You should go back to your reception." "I know what you're planning," Graham said. "Whatever you think you're going to do tonight, it's already done," Roman said. "The only question left is whether you go back in there and face it standing up, or whether you spend the next 20 minutes in this hallway making it worse." He paused. "Your choice." Graham looked at him. The calculating look, measuring angles, exit routes, the specific topography of a situation that had moved beyond his ability to manage. His eyes moved to Vivian one more time. She held his gaze and gave him nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the acknowledgement of his pain that he was looking for. He straightened his jacket, turned, and walked back toward the ballroom. Roman watched him go. Then he turned to Vivian. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. Checked her own body for the truth of it. Steady hands, steady breath. Something in her chest that was not triumph, but was in the same territory. "Yes, I'm fine." She looked toward the ballroom. "Let's go back in." They walked back into the light and sound of the reception. 300 people in formal dress, the crystal chandeliers doing their work. Celeste somewhere across the room with her Vera Wang dress and her champagne flute and the particular unawareness of someone who had not yet seen what was coming. The evening was 40 minutes from its final shape. The first toast had already started. Graham's college friend at the microphone, the warm-up anecdote, the laughter, the lifted glasses. Roman's hand found the small of her back. Not possessive, not performed, just present. The particular steadiness of someone who had decided, without announcement or theater, to stand exactly where they were. She felt his hand there, and she looked at the room. At Graham's face, reconstructed and controlled. At the 300 guests who didn't yet know what the morning would bring. At the screen on the far wall that was currently showing a slideshow of the couple's photographs. And she thought about Reyes sitting in her apartment right now with the piece open on her screen, and she thought about the folder full of 4 years of theft, and she thought about 37 people who hadn't known their money was gone, and she thought about the woman in the kitchen and the dress and the borrowed apartment and the one in the morning. Yes. And she felt Roman's hand at her back, steady, and she took a breath and held her head up and waited. Roman moved first, not toward the microphone, not yet. He excused himself from her side with a slight pressure at her back that she understood as "stay here," and crossed the room with the unhurried pace that was his signature, stopping at a point near the wall where a man she didn't recognize was standing with a laptop bag over his shoulder. They exchanged something, a look, a nod, the abbreviated communication of people who had done this before. The man with the laptop bag moved toward the AV station at the far side of the ballroom where the slideshow equipment was running. She watched this happen and understood it, and felt the moment shift beneath her feet like a tide changing direction. The college friend finished his toast. Laughter, applause, the sound of 300 glasses meeting lips. Graham smiled from the head table with the practiced warmth of a man who had been performing warmth for so long that he'd forgotten what the real thing felt like. Celeste laughed and touched his arm. A wedding planner in a headset approached the microphone to introduce the next segment. Roman was at the AV station now. She couldn't hear what he said to the technician there, but she saw the technician look at the man with the laptop bag, then back at Roman, then make the specific, careful expression of someone who had just been made a very clear offer and was doing fast mathematics about which side of the offer they wanted to be on. The technician stepped aside. The wedding planner said something about a special presentation from the groom. Graham looked up from the head table with an expression she recognized. Confusion, moving rapidly toward alarm, the look of a man whose choreography was being altered without his knowledge. He rose halfway from his chair, looked across the room, found Roman at the AV station. His face went through its final calculation. The slideshow cut out. The screen went dark, and then it filled, floor to ceiling in the Whitmore Estates ballroom, with numbers. She had imagined this moment in the abstract. She had thought about it in the corridor with Graham, and in the car on the way out, and in the 2 in the morning light of the sublet apartment. She had thought about what it would look like. She had not entirely accounted for how quiet it would get. 300 people in formal dress, and the sound went out of the room like air out of a punctured thing. Not silence exactly, the absence of the social machinery that had been running all evening, the small sounds of music and conversation, and the percussion of champagne glasses suddenly suspended, replaced by the specific quality of attention that a room produced when it understood that something unrehearsed was happening. The screen showed the first wire transfer document, clean, clear, legible from across the ballroom. Account numbers, dates, amounts. A voice from the room. "What is—" Graham was on his feet. "Turn that off." His voice came out wrong. Too high, too fast, the professional calibration completely gone. "Turn that off right now." Roman's voice from the AV station. "Sit down, Graham." Not loud. He didn't need loud. In the silence that had overtaken the room, his voice carried without effort, with the particular quality of a sound that fills available space, because the space has organized itself around it. Graham didn't sit down. His chest was working visibly, the tuxedo jacket moving with his breathing. His eyes moved around the room, to the screen, to Roman, to Vivienne, across the sea of formal wear. And in those eyes was the look she had seen in the corridor, magnified, the management fully gone, just the frightened calculating thing underneath wearing the tuxedo. "This is fraud," Roman said. Still from the AV station, but his voice was the room's now, 300 people listening. 4 years, $11 million, from accounts belonging to 37 of this man's clients. A pause. Some of you in this room tonight are those clients. The stillness broke, not loudly, in fragments, the way ice broke. A murmur from one direction and then another, someone at the back standing up, a woman near the head table making a sharp, involuntary sound as she looked at the screen and then at her husband beside her with the unmistakable expression of recognition. She watched it move through the room like weather. She watched Celeste. Her sister was still seated at the head table. She had not stood. She was looking at the screen with an expression Vivienne had never seen on her face before. Completely still, the champagne flute still in her hand, the Vera Wang dress immaculate, all of it exactly as it had been 60 seconds ago before the slideshow cut out. But her face had gone to something stripped, something without the performance layer, something that was just a 29-year-old woman sitting at a table, understanding that the floor had given way. Vivienne looked at her sister and felt something she had not expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Grief. Old, clean grief for the relationship they had never actually had and now never would. And she had not known, until this moment, that she was still capable of grieving it. Graham moved. He came off the head table platform fast, not running, but the controlled quick movement of a man trying to reach a destination before someone stopped him. He was heading for Roman. He didn't reach him. 2 men Vivienne had not seen all evening appeared from positions near the walls, unhurried, positioned, they had been there all along, and stepped into Graham's path, not touching him, just present. A doorway that was now a wall. Graham stopped, looked at the men, looked at Roman. His breathing was audible in the silence. "I will have you charged," Graham said. His voice had gone down to something compressed and airless. "Every person in this room is a witness. You are trespassing, you are defaming, you are—" "I'm showing documentation," Roman said. "I didn't steal the money." A sound from the crowd. Not laughter. Something more uncomfortable and more honest than laughter. "This is a civil matter," Graham said, and his voice cracked on the last word. The crack of a man holding something together with his teeth while his hands had given out. "This is not— You have no right to—" "Graham." Roman's voice was patient, final. "You called a journalist to bury the woman you spent 4 years diminishing. You leaked her name to create exposure for her that she didn't deserve. And you did it from a position of a man who has been stealing from his clients since the year you proposed to her. He paused. One beat, clean. You should have been more careful about who you tried to bury. Celeste made a sound. Not words. A sound, short and involuntary. The sound of someone who has been hit in a place they didn't know was exposed. She set the champagne flute down on the table very carefully, as though the carefulness of that one action could contain what was happening around it. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 3 men in dark coats entered. One of them held up identification. Federal agents, 2 women and a man. The woman in front already scanning the room with the efficient assessment of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The room's collective attention swung from the screen to the door. The murmur became something louder. Someone near Vivian said, "Oh my God," in a tone that had nothing performative in it. Graham looked at the federal agents, looked at the screen, looked at Roman, and in his face, in that final moment before the calculus fully resolved, she saw it. Not the frightened calculating thing, not the performed warmth, not the man who had sat across kitchen tables and straightened his collar while deciding her value. Just a person. Ordinary in the way catastrophe made everyone ordinary, stripped of the architecture they'd constructed around themselves, standing in formal wear in a ballroom on Long Island, watching the world they'd built come apart in front of 300 witnesses. She felt nothing she had expected to feel. She felt tired, and clean, and done. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos. The federal agent spoke to the event coordinator first, then moved toward Graham with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this before, and found nothing remarkable about doing it in a ballroom. Graham spoke to them briefly. She could see him across the room, his attorney already on the phone, the performance mechanism still operating on some residual fuel, still trying to find the managed version of this. There was no managed version of this. Guests clustered in groups, the social furniture of the evening dissolved into something more raw and immediate. The couples who recognized their own account information on the screen, finding each other across the room with the specific expression of people who had just understood something that was going to take a long time to fully process. The wedding planner had disappeared. The catering staff moved uncertainly near the edges of the room. Celeste remained at the head table. She had not moved. The champagne flute was still precisely where she'd set it down. She was sitting very straight in the Vera Wang dress, with her hands folded on the table, and she was looking at the middle distance with an expression Vivian recognized because she had worn it herself. The expression of someone doing the internal accounting of everything they'd chosen and calculating the full cost for the first time. Vivian crossed the room. She pulled out the chair beside her sister and sat down. Celeste didn't look at her immediately. When she did, her eyes were dry. She hadn't cried, which Vivian understood because she hadn't cried either. Not tonight, not in the corridor with Graham, not through any of it. The Ashcroft women had their methods. "I didn't know," Celeste said. Her voice was flat, not defensive, too hollowed out for defense, just flat. "I know," Vivian said. "About the money. I didn't know." "I know that?" Celeste looked at the table, at her folded hands. "I knew about you," she said. "About him and me while you were still... I knew that was wrong. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like." She paused. "I'm good at that, telling myself things." Vivian looked at her sister, at the careful blonde hair and the expensive dress, and the 29-year-old face that had always been held up as the example. She thought about the hug at the anniversary dinner, about the text, "I love you," about 7 months. "Yeah," she said. "I know you are." Celeste looked up at her. Something moved in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. And then, as though the words had opened a door she couldn't close, "I'm sorry, Vivian, for all of it, for the way I always..." She stopped. "I wanted what you had. You were right to think that. It wasn't about Graham specifically. It was about..." She pressed her lips together. "About wanting to be chosen, the way you always got chosen first." Vivian looked at her. "I got chosen first," she said carefully. "And then he spent 4 years telling me I was the wrong kind of chosen." She paused. "That's not winning." Celeste blinked. "I know it looked like I had things," Vivian said. "I know what it looked like from where you were standing, but you were looking at the outside of it." She looked at her sister directly. You were looking at the outside of a lot of things. A silence between them. Around them, the room continued its muffled disintegration, but here at the head table, there was a pocket of something else. Not reconciliation, it was too early and too honest for that. But the thing that had to come before reconciliation could be possible. The acknowledgement of the actual shape of what had happened. "What do I do now?" Celeste said, not asking Vivian specifically, just saying it into the space. "I don't know," Vivian said. "Figure it out." She paused. "You're going to have to figure it out yourself." She stood up. She looked at her sister one more time, at the careful blonde hair and the wreckage of the evening in her eyes, and the 29 years of complicated history between them. Then she turned and walked back across the ballroom. The federal agents finished their preliminary conversation with Graham at the edge of the room. His attorney was still on the phone, speaking rapidly, with the clipped energy of someone making calls that needed to have been made considerably earlier. Graham was standing with his hands at his sides, not cuffed. Not yet. She understood that came later at the station. This was the preliminary. The notification of charges. The reading of certain rights in a certain order, but standing with the particular stillness of a man whose body had understood something that his mind was still processing. She walked past him. She didn't stop. She didn't look at him for longer than it took to register that he was watching her cross the room. She felt his eyes on her, and she walked at the same pace she'd walked into this ballroom 2 hours ago. Level, unhurried, her chin at the right angle. And she did not give him the acknowledgement of slowing down. She found Roman near the ballroom's exit corridor. He was standing with one of his men, the one who had managed the laptop, and they were finishing a brief conversation that concluded as she approached. The man moved away. Roman looked at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She considered the question honestly, the way she'd been doing everything tonight. "I sat with Celeste," she said. He looked at her. "How was that?" "Hard," she said, "and necessary." She paused. "And done." He nodded slowly. "The agents," she said, "they're not just here because of the documents." "No," he said. "They've had an investigation open for 8 months. The documents I provided, through the appropriate channel 2 days ago, gave them sufficient cause for tonight." He paused. "Reyes's Peace Sunday will give them the public record." "You coordinated this," she said. "All of it, the timing." "Yes." "Including making sure the right federal agents had the right information before tonight." "Yes." She looked at him, at the face she'd been reading for 11 days, the controlled, unhurried surface, the thing beneath it that showed itself in increments, the man who had sat in a hotel bar and offered her something she'd needed before she'd known she needed it. "Tell me what you get out of this," she said. "The real answer, not the evening's good company version." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the ballroom was still processing itself. Voices, movement, the sound of an event dismantling. The chandeliers blazed on, indifferent. "Graham's firm managed accounts belonging to several people I have long-term relationships with," he said. "His actions damaged those relationships financially. That's one thing." He paused. "The other thing is—" He stopped, looked at the middle distance for a moment, the particular look of someone choosing the precise word. "Tell me," she said. He looked at her directly. "My mother," he said. "She worked for a man like Graham Whitaker for 18 years. In a different city, a different decade. He told her she didn't fit. He said it with her pension." A pause. She believed him. For a very long time. He held her gaze. "I've spent a significant portion of my adult life in rooms with men who operate that way, who calculate worth based on the narrowest possible criteria and discard everything that doesn't serve the calculation." Another pause, the longest one. "When I saw what he'd done to you specifically, not just the fraud, but the way he did it, the methodology of it, I wanted to correct it, completely." She held that. "That's personal," she said. "I told you it was." "You used me to do it." "Yes," he said, without deflection, "and I was wrong not to tell you the full shape of it from the beginning." He held her gaze with the specific quality of a man who had decided, somewhere in the last 11 days, that this particular woman was owed the complete truth about everything. "I can tell you that what you became to me, was not part of any plan. I can tell you that, and I understand if you don't believe it. She looked at him. She thought about 2 in the morning and yes, and the emerald dress and Carla Reyes across a coffee shop table. She thought about his hand at the small of her back. She thought about the chess game in progress on his side table and the books with broken spines. "I believe it," she said. Something shifted in his face, small and significant. "That doesn't mean we're uncomplicated," she said. "You have a federal investigation. You have whatever your actual business is. You have a world that I walked into sideways 3 weeks ago without fully understanding what I was walking into." "No," he agreed. "We're not uncomplicated. I need time," she said, "to process what tonight actually was, and what the next thing is." She paused. "And I need you to promise me that if there is a next thing, you tell me everything when you know it. Not when you decide I'm ready." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I promise." Outside the ballroom doors, she could hear the sound of the estate's front entrance, cars being called, voices in the open air, the specific audio texture of an event ending before it was supposed to. Through the corridor window, the flash of lights. A news van, she noted without surprise. Reyes had made one call after all. Not the piece, not yet, but someone had called a camera. "We should go," Roman said. They walked out through the Whitmore Estate's main entrance at 10:47. The night had gone cold the way November nights on Long Island went cold. Clean and total, the kind of cold that made the stars hard and clear and reduced the world to its essential shapes. The news van was positioned at the estate's gate, a camera operator and a reporter with a mic, the particular posture of people who had been told something was happening here and were waiting to find out what. The federal vehicles were still in the circular drive. 2 of them. One would stay. Graham would be driven in the other one, later, when the appropriate paperwork had been processed. She understood the sequence. She had handled enough corporate crisis situations to know the procedural shape of it. Guests were moving through the entrance in clusters, some heading for cars, some standing in the cold air in formal wear with the slightly dazed quality of people exiting a theater after something that had ended differently than they'd expected. She saw the couple who had recognized their account information, the woman's hand gripping her husband's arm, both of them on phones. She saw her parents. Her father was standing near the base of the entrance steps. He had his coat on already, her mother beside him, and he looked at Vivian as she came through the door with Roman at her shoulder with the expression of a man who had been a corporate attorney for 40 years and had a comprehensive professional relationship with consequences and was currently conducting a thorough assessment of the one standing in front of him. He looked at Roman, then he looked at his daughter. "Vivian," he said. "Dad." A pause. He looked at her. The dress, the necklace, the expression she was wearing, whatever was visible in her face of the evening she'd just moved through. Something happened in his expression. Something quiet. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. It was not an apology. It was not a full reckoning with anything. It was Edward Ashcroft giving his elder daughter the highest form of acknowledgement available to him in his particular emotional language, which was the assessment that she had done a thing competently. She felt it for exactly what it was and accepted it for exactly what it was. "Thank you," she said. Her mother looked at Roman for the 3rd time that evening. Then she looked at Vivian with an expression that was, and Vivian marked this, stored it, understood it was going to take a long time to fully understand, something that might have been, underneath everything, a recognition. The recognition of one woman who had spent her life managing the story she lived inside, looking at another woman who had just decided to stop. Patricia Ashcroft reached out and touched her elder daughter's arm. Brief. Exactly 1 second. Then she turned and took her husband's elbow, and they walked toward their waiting car. Vivian stood on the entrance steps of the Whitmore estate and watched them go. The drive back to the city was quiet. Not the tense quiet of earlier. The ready quiet. The coiled spring quiet of 2 people moving toward something that hadn't happened yet. This was something else. The quiet of after. The particular stillness of people who have been through something together and don't need to process it aloud immediately. Who can sit in the same space and let it settle? She watched the highway. The city began to assert itself on the horizon as they got closer. The glow of it, diffuse and orange and vast, the specific light that Manhattan made against the sky that she'd been seeing her whole life and had never stopped finding something in. She thought about Celeste in the Vera Wang dress, with her hands folded on the table and the hollowed-out honesty of "I wanted what you had." She thought about how long that had been true and how long she'd known it and refused to call it what it was. She thought about the text, "I love you," and what love actually required to be more than a word a person used because they didn't have a more honest one available. She thought about Graham in the circular drive, waiting for paperwork, still in the tuxedo. She thought about the look on his face when the screen had come on and the room had understood. She looked for something in herself, satisfaction, vindication, the clean feeling of a balance corrected. She found something smaller and more honest, the specific relief of a person who has stopped waiting for something to be over and watched it finally end. She thought about the 37 people whose accounts Graham had treated as his own resource. She thought about Carla Reyes with the piece in editorial, publishing Sunday morning, the story accurate and on the record with her name attached to it. She thought about what Monday would look like at work, and what the managing partners would say, and what her clients would say. And she thought about all of it with a steadiness that surprised her. She thought about Roman's mother in a different city in a different decade. She worked for a man like Graham Whitaker for 18 years. He told her she didn't fit. She believed him, for a very long time. She looked at Roman in the seat beside her. He was looking out his own window. The city glow caught his profile, the line of jaw, the gray at his temples, the face of a man who had made himself in hard rooms over a long time and carried it visibly, not as damage exactly, but as density, weight, the specific heaviness of a person who had seen enough of the world to stop expecting it to be other than what it was. "Your mother," she said. "Is she still alive?" He turned from the window. "No," he said. "She died when I was 32. Did she ever stop believing him? The man who told her she didn't fit." He was quiet for a moment. "Near the end," he said. "She told me she'd wasted a significant amount of her life on his opinion of her." He paused. "She said she wished someone had shown her earlier what it actually looked like, when a man like that got exactly what he deserved." Vivian held that. "I'm sorry," she said. "She would have liked tonight," he said. "Not sentiment, just assessment. Plain, like everything else," he said. She looked at him. At this man who had sat in a hotel bar and seen something in her that she'd been told for 4 years was inadequate, and had built an entire evening around the proposition that it wasn't. Who had not been uncomplicated about it. Who had not been entirely honest about it at the beginning. Who had, when she'd demanded the complete truth, given it to her. "I don't know what this is," she said. "Between us. I don't have a category for it." "No," he said. "Neither do I." "I'm not interested in a category," she said. "I'm interested in whether it's real." He looked at her in the back of the car with the city building around them, and he said simply, "It's real." She nodded, turned back to her window. Outside, the Manhattan skyline was fully present now. The bridges, the grid of light, the particular vertical architecture of the city reasserting itself, all of it exactly as she'd left it, which was the city's fundamental nature. It didn't stop for anything. It just continued, indifferent and magnificent, and you found your place inside it or you didn't. She had been finding her place inside it for 34 years. She had done it alone, and she had done it with people who didn't deserve the effort she'd given them, and she had done it while believing, on some foundational level, she hadn't examined closely enough that her place was wherever someone else determined it should be. She didn't believe that anymore. The car crossed the bridge and the city opened around them. The sound of it, even at this hour, even through the closed windows, the ambient, living roar of the thing. And she felt it the way she used to feel it when she'd first moved here, at 22, with nothing except the certainty that she was competent and willing to work, and that the city would be honest with her about what that was worth. The city had been honest. It was everyone else who hadn't been. Sankt. He walked her to the door of the sublet building. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The street was quiet. It was past midnight, the Midtown block doing its after-midnight thing, a cab moving past, someone's footsteps on the pavement a half block down, the city in one of its occasional receding moments. "Sunday," she said, "when the piece runs." "It'll be a significant day," he said. "I know, I'm ready for it." She paused. "My firm is going to have questions. My clients may have reactions. There will be several days of—" She looked at the street. "Managing the story from inside it for once." "You're good at that," he said. I'm very good at that. She looked at him. I might need a few days before, she paused, before whatever comes next. For us. Take what you need, he said. The same thing he'd said the night before in the kitchen, and she understood it was not a performance. It was simply how he operated, the patience of someone who had learned that forcing the pace of things was a form of control, and that he was no longer interested in exercising that particular control on people who mattered to him. She looked at him for a long moment on the sidewalk outside her borrowed building, with the city doing its night business around them. She looked at the face she'd been reading for 11 days and thought about what she knew of it, the genuine parts, the incomplete parts, the parts she was still going to have to understand over a longer period of time than 11 days. She thought about the chess game in progress on his side table, both sides mid-game, both sides exposed. She thought, I can work with that. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face. Brief, deliberate. The specific gesture of a person making a considered choice rather than a reactive one. She had spent enough of her life making reactive choices, absorbing other people's urgencies as her own, and she was finished with that particular pattern. He went very still under her hand. I'll call you, she said, when I'm ready. He looked at her. In his eyes, not quite hidden, not entirely revealed, the thing she'd been seeing in increments since the bar, since the chess game, since its reel in the back of a car, was the particular expression of a man who had spent a long time being the most composed person in any given room and had just been made, briefly and without drama, entirely human by a woman's hand against his face. I'll be here, he said. She dropped her hand. She took a step back. She looked at him one more time. The dark suit, the city light, the gray at his temples, the whole complicated weight of him. And she turned and went through the building's door. She was inside the sublet apartment before she took off the necklace. She set it on the kitchen counter, stood there for a moment with the quiet of the apartment around her and the distant sound of the city outside and the late November darkness at the windows. She took off the emerald dress carefully, hung it, changed into old clothes, a worn sweatshirt, soft pants, the kind of clothes that belonged to no performance and no occasion and no one's opinion of what she should be wearing. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen counter in the dark and drank it, watching the city through the window the way she had weeks ago, the night everything had collapsed, when she'd stood in this same spot and watched the same window and felt the specific airlessness of a life that had been quietly contracting around her for years without her fully naming it. She named it now. 4 years of a relationship that had asked her, in small and consistent ways, to be less. A family dynamic that had measured her against a standard she hadn't chosen. A habit of absorbing other people's assessments of her value as though they were objective facts rather than projections. Other people's fears, other people's limitations, other people's narrow ideas about what a woman who looked like her and took up the space she took up was entitled to want and occupy and become. She had held all of it, carefully, competently, for a very long time. She set down the tea. She went to her laptop. She opened it, not to email, not to work, but to a blank document, and she sat there for a moment looking at it. She typed, Note to self. The career survives Sunday. The clients who matter will stay. The ones who don't matter won't. This is already known. Move forward. She looked at it, added, The dress is yours. You earned it. Keep it. She looked at that. Then, after a moment, added one more line. You were never the problem. Say it until it's the first thing you know, not the last thing you have to remind yourself of. She saved the document, closed the laptop. She went to bed. She slept, for the first time in a very long time, without the weight of someone else's verdict about her worth pressing against her chest in the dark. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued its essential business. The streets and the light and the perpetual motion of the thing. The city that had no interest in anyone's collapse or recovery and would therefore always be exactly honest about what you were made of. She had always loved that about it, the way it asked you to be exactly as substantial as you actually were, no more and no less, and gave you the whole of itself in return. She was, she thought, as the city moved through its hours outside her window, exactly as substantial as she'd always been. It had taken her 34 years and a crime boss in a hotel bar to stop arguing with that. She could live with the math.